Hello, hello.
GM.
Awesome. So yeah, let's get started. I mean, most people here would already know you, but if you want to go ahead and introduce what new thing you're doing with Infinix and
Sure. You may know me from Synthetics Days, the DeFi Summer Days, but I've been building for the last couple of years a new project called Infinix, which is designed to improve some of the UX issues that we have in building DeFi, the things that I encountered in the Synthetics Days, we've got a lot of solutions that we're working on to improve UX in DeFi.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's actually start diving with the elephant in the room, which is the EOF. There was a lot of Twitter drama around it and like a ACD, a decision that took place that it's finally out from the update. But what are your thoughts around like the pros and cons of it? And like how does the security change? And like what could the community improve? Because this directly affects the UX of Ethereum, right? So
I mean, DevX is important, of course, right? Especially at this conference. I don't want to get booed off the stage. I think it's not incorrect to say that we should be doing things to improve developer experience, that we have aspects of programming and Solidity that are suboptimal, for sure. Like everyone understands that. The issue, I think, and how this whole thing is kind of symptomatic of the dichotomy between builders who are building at the application layer and the researchers who are working at the consensus layer is that oftentimes the unintended consequences of a change like this are just really ignored. Right? Even to the point of, like in the last few days, people were like, how the fuck did we not test this? Like, This is insane, right? And it's like, oh, our job's not to test things. Like that, our job is to optimize for this, particular outcome that is idiosyncratic to our like research mandate, right? Your gas estimation nonsense is not our problem, right? Which is pretty wild when you think about it. It's like, guys, we've spent like 4 years getting better at estimating gas, and now it's just like, oh, let's start again. It's kind of crazy. So I'm glad that, and this is the one thing that I will say is most of the time, and we saw this back many years ago with one of the changes that the Kyber team called out that created a huge issue with gas, like massively impacted the gas on one of the opcodes, and again no one tested it because it was like, oh yeah, like running smart contracts, like that's not our problem, right? Like we're working at the consensus layer. But in the end, the rough consensus mechanism that we have for making changes to Ethereum does work. It might be slow, it might be inefficient. In this case, it was extremely inefficient, but we do get there. And so enough social pressure is able to kind of overturn this. And so we got the right result, I would say. But it's a bit of an own goal.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, we should take, like some pages from how the semiconductor industry works, because they are like the machine code and the chip manufacturers. And chip manufacturers never say we don't care about how the machine code's powering rocket is gonna get impacted.
It would be wild to think that, right? Like that's not our problem. Yeah. Like it's everything above you in the stack is your problem on some level, right?
So that makes sense. And what do you think about the space in account abstraction? We have like few EIPs like with 4337 and like 7702 getting activated. Like for me, like I was always more leaning towards 7702. And we have seen like from the past, okay, there has been some adoption for 4337, but I personally feel it was like more forced than actually organic. What are your thoughts around it, and what's the way forward?
I think at a fundamental level, they're both directionally correct, right? Like both approaches are directionally correct, with different trade-offs. I think it's interesting if you talk to the infra providers, even the ones that have implemented 4337, they haven't implemented it to the standard. They've kind of gone, like they've like done some stuff and then gone around the back on other things and haven't actually adopted it, as it's specified, which again kind of speaks to this mismatch between the intent of the EIP and the usage of it, right? If you don't talk to users and find out how they will implement something, then it's very easy to implement something in a suboptimal way. And this is one of the other challenges I think with like generalized solutions. Many of the solutions in the Ethereum ecosystem are extremely theoretical. Right? They don't actually contemplate the usage of the platform and how a smart contract engineer will be building a set of smart contracts. That said, we've chosen 7702, where as in Infinex has chosen 7702. That's the direction we're headed. I think it is a very good improvement to UX, and it's one of the components that has allowed us to kind of build this very abstracted omni-chain view of the world. And so, yeah, I think, again, it's not a huge issue if 4337 doesn't get adopted. It was directionally correct, and it's kind of like, okay, that one didn't work, but 7702 does.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, 437 is like a glorified smart contract with like a network, right?
Yeah.
And the issue was like 95% of the apps I've ever used doesn't have 4337 wallets. The ones which have like what probably Alchemy as one provider, like some other providers. You put money in them and then you have to re-sign up with another provider and kind of put money there. And then you don't see them on D-Bank and problems like this, right?
Yeah, there's a fragmentation issue with it, and there's also like some jank around like an alternative mempool and stuff, which is just not ideal. And again, like directionally correct. I don't want to criticize people for writing EIPs. I think that anything that is focused on UX is bullish, right, for Ethereum. But again, it can't just be a theoretical solution; it has to be practical as well.
Yeah. And what do you think about because you guys heavily work on 7702, right? Do you think there could be any security implications that we probably haven't explored yet? But we might have to be careful in putting all of this in production because it's like a big change at the EOA level for every account that exists, right? So.
Yeah, I think there are already chains that have implemented it. So we have seen what it does in the wild to some extent. Obviously not on mainnet, and therefore there's a number of things that that I think are potential implications. But we use Zero Dev, and they're already very much leaning in that direction. So I think we can reason about it fairly well, and I'm not super concerned, but obviously we'll see.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And the other that leads to for the question of like we're leaning more towards the standardization here. Like if you look at some of the Web 2 industries with even like half of the market cap of what we have in crypto, they have very robust standards, right? For me personally, I don't see a lot of those standards being followed onto like wallets or infrastructure that deals with users' money and custodial in general. What do you think we can do to change it, and can we make like universal standards and like push EIPs such as account prefixes, right? Like like ETH and then the address, ARB and then the address,
The 15th standard problem, huh?
Yeah.
So look, I think I've been thinking about this a lot because we've got an announcement this week about how we've approached this problem, and I've talked to Pedro, and I've talked to a bunch of people, the Rainbow Wallet guys, and various people that build infra for wallets and have adhered to the standards. And there is definitely a push for standardization. The problem is that I think you end up in this state of stalemate between application developers and the infrastructure providers. And what I mean by that is, as an application builder, you don't really have control of the infra, right? You don't have control of the interfaces. The interfaces are fairly well kind of structured and ossified at this point, right? It's basically MetaMask. The MetaMask API is kind of what dictates how we pass the signatures through and interact with contracts at the dApp layer. And everyone else is kind of built around that same architecture. And so if you are an application developer that wants to do something differently, and I'll give you a very specific example. Today, as a dApp, you can only have one chain in context at a time.
Yep.
right? So you go to Aave, and there's like this big drop down, which is like, which market are you choosing, right? Which is a bit insane if you think about it. The only reason that is the case today is path dependency, right? We had one chain, and so we built everything with this expectation of one chain, and then we had a bunch of L2s and Solana and a bunch of other things that have now created this weird thing where like we're locked into one path, and it's very unsatisfying, and we all know it, but we can't really think our way out of it. So as an application developer, you are building an application, and you've got a wallet that can only have one chain in context at a time, right? And so you have to build your application with that in mind. You can't change that. You have no control over the infrastructure. Then as an infrastructure provider, you need to be backwards compatible with all the dApps, which are also built to have one chain in context. And so the only way to break out of this stalemate and to kind of this inadequate equilibrium is to have someone who's willing to go and build the infra and the application at the same time. And historically, no one was willing to do that. And then Infinex was like, actually, YOLO, we will, because we're trying to compete with centralized exchanges. And centralized exchanges are full stack applications. They control the infra, they control everything. There's a little bit of a trade-off you have to make, which is giving up custody. But if you're okay with that, you get a full stack application that is multi-chain. You don't need to care about gas. You don't need to care about any of the things that we care about when we go into decentralized application land. And so we said, actually, no, we're going to optimize for UX, and we're going to optimize for abstracting away all of these things. And so we're going to build this full stack application, which means rebuilding the signing infrastructure. And so we don't have a browser wallet. We don't have any of these things like a WAGMI connector. We don't use Wallet Connect. We don't use any of that infrastructure. We use some modern stuff that's available, like zero dev, turnkey, but we basically rebuilt the entire stack. And the only way to break out of that stalemate is to be willing to do that, and most people are not crazy enough to do that. Now, the question is then, okay, you've done that, congratulations, you built a little silo, and there's like 20 people using it. What does this mean for me as an application developer? What it means is we need to make that available to you. We need to take the thing that we've rebuilt, and we need to say, okay, now you can use it as well, which is maybe what's coming.
I was told that we don't have browser wallets, That still annoys me, like why when I was at Sushi, we expanded like 40 chains, and we had to add like a search element on the drop down so that people can easily search the chains, right?
It's crazy. And I mean, you look at MetaMask and you go, okay, there's no chain concept at first, right?
And it's so slow after a point because you have so many chains, dev nets, test nets.
Exactly. Like there was a period where you'd add test nets, and it was like, okay, you add test nets and you have your like dev environment that has test nets, but you would never have that in your like production environment that you're using for your normal transactions. And now the drop down is like 8,000 pages long. It's like just insane, right? So we need to solve that. We need to rethink how the infrastructure and application interact. And unfortunately, the standards path for doing that is just too slow. And so we just said, YOLO, we're going to do it ourselves.
I mean, like if probably what I would say as a devil's advocate, if MetaMask would have pushed it, it would have been way easier to get a standard because they already had like so much of distribution, right? Like we don't even have portfolio proper done. Like have you tried adding a token on MetaMask?
But
half of the people don't even do it.
I think the interesting thing about even MetaMask, unfortunately, now is trapped. Right? They're trapped in this like this
kind of a thing.
If you look at Ravi, right? Ravi got adoption by literally pretending to be MetaMask. That's its solution, is like, we'll use the exact same APIs. They have no control over they can't even make their own APIs, right? So this kind of, this ossification of the standards means that even MetaMask is now trapped by this. They can't get out of it. The only way they can get out of it is if they were to build their own application. And they've built a mini app, right? They've got swaps inside of MetaMask, and they tried to build snaps and stuff, and it was kind of dumb.
I don't think the snaps were also insecure in a lot of ways.
It didn't really go anywhere, but like they even saw this. They're like, we cannot break out of this kind of gravity well that we've created, right? And so what's the solution? The solution is sidestep all of it and just start again and build from first principles a new thing. It's the 15th standard problem, unfortunately, because now you've got your own thing, and everyone else has to adopt it. But if you build it well enough, and it is successful enough, and you have distribution, you have a platform on which to kind of use to leverage your distribution, it can work. Yeah. And so I'm very confident that we can actually break out of this equilibrium that we're in today. Maybe that's hopium, but we'll see.
Yeah, and it's actually a good segue to the next question of the entire cross-chain UX. Like we just spoke about the multi-chain UX, and it's so bad. Now the cross-chain UX is much worse, right? So like, and we need platforms like Infinix that basically like kind of put it all under one umbrella so that everything is abstracted. But how do you think we solve this in a more scalable way? Like because you guys kind of are like a decentralized exchange way, right? So you have a huge order flow. So will it move towards more of intent side, or like you would still find people LPing on chain, and so it'll be like more like cow swap plus across, or it'll be like layer 0 plus Uniswap?
So when we started out to solve swapping and bridging, we found Li-Fi initially, right? And we're like, oh, this is a solved problem. Cool. Okay, we'll just like integrate their API, and then we're good to go. And immediately we found that there are huge gaps in the kind of implementation that they as a single aggregator have been able to do. For example, they don't support Stargate OFT tokens, which sounds fine until you accidentally airdrop a bunch of ENA tokens onto Arbitrum, and all of your users are trapped there because there's no liquidity to get off the chain. So we've been forced to basically aggregate all of these aggregators, so to become a meta aggregator, but then also go and disaggregate them as well. And so we now have, I think, like 15 different bridge and swap providers, both single chain, cross chain, intents, etc. And even then, I would still say we have like 75% coverage. Oh, okay. So we're probably going to have to get to like 25 different providers, including providers like Ooga Booga on Berachain, right, which we just integrated. So you are going to end up having to go all the way down to the DEX layer and then all the way up through the aggregation layer and intents if you want to do it properly, which means make it as seamless as possible so that a user never needs to know what chain they're on or never needs to know what route is optimal. It just does it for you. And even once that's done, then you need to actually be able to do multi-hop transactions, because oftentimes there are multiple routes from one path from point A to point B, and it's not obvious which one is the best route necessarily, right? So if you're going from Solana and you have Sol on Solana and you want ETH on Arbitrum, there are probably 4 or 5 different routes that any given time are more or less optimal. And so you need to be able to orchestrate multi-hop transactions that stitch together multiple aggregators and bridges in order to be able to optimize for the user. Because the way that we think about it is, imagine you had like this omniscient, omnipotent LLM, right? Like an AGI. And it would know at any time the state of every single blockchain, and it would know the optimal route for every single order that anyone could potentially propose, and that's the state that we need to get to. And we need to be able to get to that point where we have a thing that is so certain of the state of all of the different blockchains, and this is like a deterministic problem. You can solve the problem, but it just requires really, really good orchestration.
Yeah, but I mean, like data is like I feel like crypto is like one of the fields where we have everything public and available.
It's all there. You
but
just
we still
need
don't
to be
have
smart.
data for it.
Yes,
you
just
you don't find APIs and everything to search.
You need really good indexers. You need a bunch of different things in order to do this really well. It's not a trivial problem, but it is solvable.
How do you think about like these new AI updates coming in could shape the way how we interact with crypto? And because sometimes some apps are complex, as users say, and how would AI change this? Because sometimes I started build my own small LLM. I actually don't use Uniswap or any other interface. I just created like a small wallet, plugged it into an AMM, and I can say, oh, Vitalik is poor. The AI already understands that we need to donate ETH to him, So how do you think the entire UX is going to change, and how would it impact, like say, Infinix or the space in general?
So I think that there's this kind of movement whenever there's a new tool where everyone wants to use it, right? So I saw like this proof of concept that someone had created and tweeted about yesterday, where they built this agent that was supposed to be able to do all these actions for you. And the first thing that they did was type, "What's the price of Bitcoin?" And I'm like, that's the dumbest. Like, we have a solution for that. It's called CoinGecko,
Yeah.
right? Like, the idea that you would need to like use natural language to like type
Yeah.
out like, you know, what's the price of Bitcoin seems a bit silly. But you can imagine saying, you know, what's the optimal route from going Solana to Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's actually more interesting, right? Because it can go and check all the routes for you and, you know, run the calculations and come back to you with a path, and then you click the button. So we have a proof of concept that we've built, which is a very rudimentary orchestration layer where inside of Infinex you have an agent that will not completely orchestrate the transaction for you, but it will basically give you, it'll render in real time for you all of the buttons that you need to click, because you need to actually you know, passkey sign all of the transactions. So it'll say, okay, you want to, you know, get yield on Berachain in the form of you know, some WBTC ETH Kodiak pool or something like that, right? So you've got USDC, you need to swap 50% of it into WBTC, 50% into ETH, you need to bridge, and it'll give you the sequence of transactions. And then you imagine the next step is, okay, put all of that and orchestrate it together. But the reality is, for today, you shouldn't actually trust the LLM, right? Like they you know, are not perfect, right? So it's actually easier to see all the sequence of steps and go, yes, okay, I want to do that, which is not normie friendly yet, but we're getting closer.
Yeah, you just need like a tenderly verification as well.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Before you do that, make sure you just
What's
check
the
and
output of
proofread it.
this?
Yeah. And I also feel like, I think like, let's say now you said that it Infinix got integrated into Berachain with Ooga Booga, right? Ooga Booga is the V3 fork, I assume. Or whatever, like whatever the V3 native DEX is, and most of the chains are just built on forks. There will be some Aave, Compound, Morpho, or you know, like V3 forks. And I think like if AI is good enough to understand what the user wants, can understand the addresses on chain, right? It can actually do the integrations without you guys actually have to push the integrations on the front end, right? So now you would be like, okay, like now I want to go on Berachain, right? But Infinix, let's say, haven't like manually did an integration, the AI should be smart enough to kind of, you know, figure out, oh, it's a V3 clone. You can get that data from DeFi Llama. It'll be like, oh, these are the addresses and this is how a swap should be done, you know. So
yeah, the issue that we have is that the list of infra for us to support a chain is now very long. It's like a whole page, right? And there's some like, you know, alternative solutions we can use, RPC providers, indexers, etc. But to get to stand up a new chain inside Infinex is you know, bit of a challenge, right? Like there's engineering work. I certainly wouldn't give it to an LLM to go and integrate a new chain for us. One thing that I have found incredibly interesting this year, like just in the last 4 months, I would say, is the you know, we have 50 plus people in Infinex, and we're all in a single office, right? So we all spend all day together, and I've really noticed that the people who have deeply gone down the path of how to use LLMs and how to optimize, you know, optimize prompts, are really starting to distance themselves from the people who are fading it. Who are like, it's not ready, whatever. Like we have one front-end engineer who basically runs a team of LLMs that like do stuff, and he's like, it's like he's running a team of engineers. It's crazy. And so you can the people who are early adopters who have really leaned into it, there's a big gulf between them and the average person. So that's been very interesting to me to watch. And that goes for like people in marketing, people in you know, in every different aspect, because especially in crypto, there's so much data out there. Like there's so many references that you can pull for things, and you know, if you use deep research and get it to go and, you know, do a report for you on like the evolution of wallets, there's just like millions and millions of pages, because there's so many people producing content in crypto that you can like pull together incredible reports, and it also minimizes hallucinations as well, because there is so much source material to go to. So yeah, like I'm incredibly bullish about the ability to kind of optimize things and increase efficiency, because, you know, in a DeFi project, you need to be as efficient as possible. It's hard enough to do your day-to-day job. You know, you need to maximize efficiency.
Yeah, that's great. And what do you think, like, you know, is like the holy grail for Infinix that you see, you know, like what is, like when you sleep and when you wake up, the dream of Infinix comes to you, like what is that the best product you want to build, and why do you think like you you'll probably be the ones who are like pushing for it and contributing towards it.
So we took our life into our own hands and built this siloed product that we had full control over, right? And it's not perfect. It doesn't have all of the functionality that we would like. There's still a lot of work to add yield, to add perps and spot trading, and a bunch of other functionality that we need to be able to compete with centralized exchanges. So we're very happy with that, but it is still an unsatisfying state of the world if you're in a silo, because trying to get people to adopt it is challenging. And
you can just launch on Solana.
And there's always going to be some new thing every single day that someone has released that you have not integrated. And if you run the thought experiment, even if we had 1,000 engineers or 10,000 engineers who were working every day to integrate every new thing as quickly as possible, you're still going to be behind the state of the world, right? And so the only way to fix that is to go and expose the things that we've built, this new infrastructure that we've built, to external parties, and let them build it. And so I think the most exciting thing for me is we believe we've built a new wallet form factor, and this new wallet form factor will enable new applications to be built. And so, we're not ready for this hackathon, but hopefully by the time we get to France in a few months, we'll be ready, and it's going to be very interesting to see what people in a weekend can hack together when you give them some new info to play with.
Yeah, if you give them an SDK and a ETH Global Hackathon with 50K, you'll
100%.
find like 1,000 integrations of things done,
Exactly, that's the plan.
Yeah, so imagine you're like Vitalik for a day. What change would you like to make on Ethereum instantly to make it great again, or push any EIP that you had in mind that this should be in prod, but it's not.
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot. As someone who worked very hard to meme L2s into existence, and in fairness, I did try and meme a single L2 into existence. I did try and get us to all coordinate around optimism. And I think if we had all been on optimism, we would have avoided some of the challenges that we've had over the last few years. But unfortunately, that was not to be. So in the end, we ended up with 100 or 200 or 500 L2s. And the problem that we have is that while that has massively increased block space, it has created this situation where the L1 is no longer profitable, right? Like all of the margin has been captured by the L2s, and we do not have good economics around blob space. And so if I were Vitalik for a day, I've said this publicly before, I would find a way to increase the price of blobs in a way that was, that L2s couldn't route around, because at the moment they're escape hatches they can use. They can just go and submit, directly outside of the blob space if they needed to. So find a way to put pressure on L2s to, decrease their margins and bring the margin of block space back to L1. I think that is the single most important thing we can do in the short term to rebuild the narrative for Ethereum. There's a whole bunch of things in the long term, like scaling L1, but before you scale L1, we've got enough scale, we just need some more profit. We need to burn some more ETH, so that would be step one. Yeah,
makes sense. And I think for the blob, I think there is EIP which tackles this kind of like dynamic markets and pricing for it, like even like if L2s want, they can hedge it for it and stuff. So I think that's pretty interesting. So maybe if that gets pushed, so what you're saying happens in real life. So yeah, do you guys have any question? Or are you guys happy with just the MetaMask UX? Anyway, since we don't have any questions, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for your time. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
Thank you very much.